Welcome to another episode of No Expectations, the podcast. I'm here with Sujata tonight. We're just having a impromptu conversation about my new novel, Invisible Sun. And she's got a couple questions. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome to have you back.
Thank you. I really just am so curious about this book. I was wondering, what made you, what brought you to the point in your life where you decided, I want to write this book?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure there's a short answer. I guess we have to give some background about Invisible Sun. It's a book, a novel about um, the death of an older brother via suicide, and the youngest brother having to not only come to terms with that death, but also, um, in a way, clean up the mess and um, become more of a man, and in doing so, has to tackle some really difficult thoughts for himself, and then try to manage his only other living brother with him as they go through this process of mourning and grief, and trying to find their way to make some sense of what the oldest brother did.
Mm.
Um, I've been very open about the fact that that part of the story is um, semi autobiographical. Like, I lost my oldest brother to suicide. That was the catalyst. That was the beginning point for me 20 something years ago. And I've spent the last 20 years ruminating on that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I took my first endeavor into the art of storytelling via a novel and waiting impatiently, um, I was just kind of seeing if I could, like, how I could work in the medium. How could I
Mm-hmm.
tell a story?
Mm-hmm.
Could it work? And I felt waiting impatiently worked as a story, and it helped me grow as a writer and a storyteller. But this is a story that I wanted to tell for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
um, and kind of finding my sea legs with the first novel
Mm-hmm.
opened up the opportunity to go to find the confidence to sit down and write Invisible Sun, which you know all centers around the death of the oldest brother, Hugo,
Mm-hmm.
and and trying to find my way to that. And it was a it was a strange connection to the universe for me, because the story just wrote itself. It's not all fact. It's not all fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of both. And sometimes I kind of, even as an author, I struggle to like, what actually happened? Did that really happen, or did I make this up?
Mm-hmm.
But I was so um, so deeply connected to not only the narrative, but just the process of creation,
Mm-hmm.
that it just happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so it got to the point where it was
Yeah.
time to tell the story.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about your process of creation, because when I when I read both of your books, I was really struck by how much of um, how much the main character Ian makes sense out of the chaos around him. You know, the universe kind of presents him with all these signs that he's able to grasp and read, which not all of us really have the ability to do. Once in a while, we get a glimpse of that in our lives. But tell me about your process and how you assimilate that. How do you make sense of it all?
Well, I don't know that I make sense of it in real time. I think a lot of it is um, about the way I create is the way I live my life with regiment. If I'm doing the same things every day,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be sitting in meditation or exercising, or um, whatever that is, eating the same things consistently, and having those kind of what I call bookends to my life, those beginnings and those ends of the days, because it frees my mind up to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
if I'm bogged down in the uncertainties of each day, then I can't focus on the art.
Mm-hmm.
And so having those structured pillars in my day helps me sit down every day in the creative process. And I've spoken about it many times. Uh, the first uh, the first novel, I just would turn off my phone at the same time every day
Mm-hmm.
and be like, okay, I'm going to sit down for 2 hours, um, regardless if I write one sentence or one chapter or whatever, and I'm just going to see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is about spontaneity for me.
Mm.
I'm not a big, heavy editor. I like to write things as they come out and let it go. I don't go backwards. And so when I write a chapter or a sentence, there's a good chance that I won't go back to it again and really take the cleaver to it. I'll just kind of let it go, but let the story find its own life. And so, to your question about Ian, I understand Ian because I too am very what I consider myself an empath, and so I use Ian as a protagonist, as a character, as an opportunity for me to explore different thoughts through somebody else's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's taking a left when I took a right, and what are those?
Yeah.
What are those? What kind of waves do those create in his universe
Mm-hmm.
opposed to mine, or are they similar? So I get to explore those with him. Um, but Ian's very introspective. Ian's very, much an empath himself.
Mm-hmm.
Even though 99.9% of every reader who's read Waiting and will read Invisible thinks Ian's a first class, grade A jerk.
Yeah.
But I find that I put him in some really bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he responds in his situations that he's been put in is is not always great. His tools in his toolbox are not great.
Yeah.
So I get to explore those.
Yeah. I love how you said that you don't go back and edit.
Mm,
Um, that to me sounds like when you write, you're connected to source.
yeah.
How do you connect to source? What's your ritual?
Being consistent, showing up, putting yourself into places. Um, like when I write, I listen to the same music every time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what it is, but I create a playlist of music that gets me there.
Mm-hmm.
And it might take a little while to massage that to find that. But for me, having that same list, the same songs, I no longer am curious about the melodies or the lyrics or the drum parts. It just becomes a calming aspect. It's one of those other things. I don't have to focus on that anymore because it's consistent. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing over and over for me. Um, for Invisible, I put myself in New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
where the story takes place. What I call the heart of darkness, because the story is a dark place,
Mm-hmm.
in Ian's eyes, and I felt as a storyteller, I needed to immerse myself there. I've been
Mm-hmm.
to New Orleans countless times throughout
Mm-hmm.
my life since a young man. I have nothing but love for the place, but I felt I could only tell the story and create real grit about the city by being there again and kind of living in it and
Mm-hmm.
feeling what it felt like again. So that was part of the process. Um, but I think this is about trusting yourself. And I'm not going to say that happens for me all the time. There's many days that I'll come away and I'm like, that's rubbish.
Uh-huh.
That's rubbish. And then there's some days it's like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And it is about finding, from to get into the spiritual part of it, it is about finding balance in your life, in trust in your intuition, so that you can be spontaneous
Mm-hmm.
and go, oh, I'm going to follow that thread and see what happens. And
Right.
it may be a dead end,
Right.
but it may not be.
Yeah. I'm reminded of this interview with Rick Rubin, where somebody asks him, "What's your talent?" And he says, "I don't know how to play music. I don't know how to sing. I don't. But what I do know is that I have very specific likes and dislikes,
Right.
and I can really tune into that. Do you feel that way about when you write and you kind of?
Yeah. I mean, I've been a creative ever since I was, a very young man. Whether it be, building railroad trains and constructing all of these like artificial worlds out of paper mache and stuff like
Mm-hmm,
that, and painting all these, painting trains and creating towns, these
mm-hmm,
buildings and stuff, to being a musician,
mm-hmm,
um, to being, creative as a teacher,
mm-hmm.
um, to now creating works of fiction in the form of storytelling. Um,
That's very interesting because when I read Invisible, I was really struck by how you put the reader right there in New Orleans.
right.
You could feel the sights and sounds and smells even
Hmm.
of the city. So you've been doing this for a while. You've
Right.
been creating these universes.
Creating those universes, but it's mostly been in, aside from music creation, it's mostly been in solitude. Like, so those times as a
Mm-hmm,
child, creating those,
mm-hmm,
those towns and railroad places or whatever those, I was by myself. But when I became a musician and started being in bands, I had to learn to change the way I thought about collaboration,
mm-hmm,
and like, okay, I have to give and take, like somebody else may be doing, and that made me a better creative.
mm-hmm,
Um, but then coming back and finding writing, it was all on me now,
mm-hmm,
and that was also invigorating. Saying like, there's nobody else. I don't have to run this through somebody else's filter and go, what do you think about this?
mm-hmm.
Like, this is me. Um, so to kind of Rick Rubin's point is, yeah, you have to trust yourself. You have to trust your instincts. But it's also that when you're creating good art, now it could be whatever. Again, it's like you're
Mm-hmm.
painting a picture or you're making a meal. When you start to create something good um, and interesting, it's going to divide your audience, right? There's going to be some
Yeah,
people who love it, some people hate it.
yeah,
Um, and for me as a creative, ever since a kid, it's like it's not about mediocrity, because mediocrity is safety. People feel comfortable in that space where like, oh, I've been here before. I mean,
mm-hmm,
there's nothing that's going to make me feel strange.
mm-hmm,
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's great places for pop music and
mm-hmm,
all of those things. But for me as an artist, what I want to do is push people to the boundaries
mm-hmm.
and make them feel and think things that maybe make them feel uncomfortable, that maybe make them think about things differently. I think Invisible touches on that a whole lot more than Waiting did.
Yeah,
Um, Invisible is a tough story, but it is, I think, there's a big thread of um, bonds,
mm-hmm,
about like finding something in yourself, finding other things and people around you, and finding beauty in what is seemingly ugly.
yeah. I think the Invisible Sun, the book, is such an important story at this point in time in human history because we've just been through the pandemic and there's still this epidemic of suicide
Yeah,
across the globe.
I don't know what the numbers of suicide are throughout the world, but I know that there's been a massive uptick in people deciding to end their own lives. And I, I won't, well, while I never really have a goal in mind when I write or create,
Mm-hmm,
um, it's about what I want as a creative. And I
mm-hmm,
know that may sound selfish, but I'm the one that has to live with that forever.
mm-hmm,
So again, not, trusting my gut and not feeling like this is mediocre, right? So as an artist, I need to stretch my bounds and make and write and create for myself.
mm-hmm,
But just like Waiting, in Invisible Sun is about giving one person the opportunity to find hope.
mm-hmm,
So if you walk away from reading Invisible Sun, um, and it changes your mind, or you have a different perspective about suicide in your own life or somebody else's life,
Mhm.
or maybe somebody's already completed that act and how that's impacting you, then that's what this is about.
Mhm.
Um, as a survivor of losing my brother to suicide, it really changed my perspective on the world and my own life,
Mhm.
and in a not great way, you know. Um, so I think it's important that it be continue to be brought out into the light, because 20 years ago, I'll be quite honest, there was no support system for me. Like uh, it was, as a young man, I'm like struggling with this, and I'm struggling with depression because of it. And it was a lot of like, oh, you'll be fine, just rub some dirt on it, you're a man, be a man, and it'll be fine, it's just
Mhm.
you'll get through it.
Mhm.
And I was alone as somebody who was suffering that, at the loss of my brother, at the loss of the way it happened at such a young age for him. And I'd like to continue that journey of bringing this out.
Mhm.
So as Ian goes through these thoughts of like, his own existence and his own connection with his faith, whether it be God or the universe or his brother, these bonds, he's testing these things. He's thinking about these things because I can share that emotion. I can
Mhm.
share those things because 20 years ago, I was thinking, God, if God really exists, why would he do this?
Mhm.
If the universe is so generous, why would it do this? Um, and I want to explore that. That's what I wanted to explore in this book, and tell people that it's okay to be in these places emotionally. You can come out. Um, Part of the editorial process, like, this went through some editors,
Mhm.
and the editors said to me, "It's like, where's the transformation?
Right.
Where does he go from here?
Right. He just continues to struggle.
He continues to struggle." And I said, this story takes place in just a few days.
Mhm.
And as a young man dealing with my own mourning, or
Mhm.
not dealing with it, not having the process of dealing with that mourning, I remember people telling me the same thing, like, expedite this process, get
Mhm.
through it.
Mhm.
The faster you get through this, the easier it'll be.
Right.
And 3 days is not enough time to process a traumatic event.
Right.
And so don't let anyone ever tell you, like, okay, there's a time limit on this process. There's
Right.
not. It takes what it takes. So,
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, one of the great authors that I was reminded of when I read Invisible Sun was Camus.
mm,
Um, each word in the book is so dense and so full of meaning. Um, Even though it's such a short read,
mm-hmm.
it takes time to process. I had to read it a couple of times to really understand all the threads that are woven through it. Um, and it's a masterpiece. So I can't wait for our audience to read it. When is it going to be out?
It'll be released October 17th of 23. So just a few weeks away from now. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. My recommendation is maybe go to your local bookshop and ask them to order it for you. Obviously you find whatever retailer you want, but support your local bookseller, because they're pivotal to the whole process.
Mhm.
Community to supporting artists, um, and yeah, I think it'll be out on paperback and digital form in multiple venues. So find your favorite retailer, and look for it on October 17th.
Fantastic. I can't wait. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And look for new great things from you. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks, Sujata.